I spoke briefly on this topic in a different series that I did back in, I think it was the end of 2019. And it came back to my attention, and I wanted to take it a different direction a little bit, because this topic is one that I think we overlook in the Christian world. We approach Christianity as once you confess and believe, you're done. You're set. It's now you wait for heaven. And I want to hopefully put together a framework of stories that help us to understand what is happening in this narrative of the Bible and what God is asking for us to do. So hopefully that's at the conclusion of this, you're going to understand a better narrative of how God is calling this. Before we launch into this, let's have a quick word of prayer. Father God, thank you for pulling us all here together in our busy schedules and our lives just to focus and settle and worship you and to listen to your words and stories and hopefully apply them into our lives that we may live out the mission in a better way for you. In Messiah's name we pray, amen. I'm going to start a little bit here in the beginning of the story. And it's a story where God creates man. And when he creates man, he does something very interesting. It says that he creates man in his image. Now, I had always thought that God created man. That's 6'2", 6'3", blue eyes, white American, debonair. Physically, in my head, I'm thinking God has 2 legs, 2 arms, head. Physically, we're created in his image. The Hebrew word is different. The Hebrew word is tselem, or tsel is the root word. And tsel means shade or shadow. We are created as a reflection or a shadow of God and his purpose. Inside of you was put this purpose, this shadow of what God would be. I love it in the prophecy, I believe it's in Ezekiel, it says, in the last days, each one will become a shelter from the wind, in the shade of a mighty rock, like springs of living water in the desert. When Christ, the last day, comes, each one of us will be like the shadow of a great rock. I love that picture that when God creates man, he's a shadow of a great rock. Now, Michelangelo's paintings are amazing, but when I saw these fingers coming together and going, that's interesting. If one was a silhouette and one was the real thing, we're the silhouette. But something happens in this garden, and man walks away from God. In doing so, he walked away from the rock. So he is now purposeless in this world as this shadow, and he's walking in this void, because when God creates the Garden of Eden, he puts man in it to expand it. He's supposed to go forth and multiply, to subdue the earth and create the entire earth as an Eden. That's his purpose. That's what he's doing. But man walks away. God looks at man, and you would think as a creator, when version 1.0 fails, what do? You wipe it clean and build version 2.0. Correct? He doesn't do that. He looks at the situation and says, I need somebody to help me clean up this mess. And where does he go? What does he do? What would you think of God putting in a renovation schedule for earth? He needs somebody to partner with to rebuild. How do you build restoration? Is this a house-flipping TV series on Netflix? This is episode 1 of season 1. Who is he going to call to partner with to restore this mess that man did? And he looks at man and says, I'm going to partner with man. and they're going to help me restore this. They're going to help me bring order to this chaos, shalom to this chaotic world. The person that destroyed it? Now, there's a glimpse of what this restoration looks like in Isaiah chapter 58. I just want to read a little bit of it because it tells us what this partner of God, this 1-800 restoration program that God is starting to engage in. There's a picture in Isaiah chapter 58. I want you to listen to this. Shout it aloud. Do not hold back. Raise your voice like a trumpet. Declare to my people their rebellion, and to the descendants of Jacob their sins. Is not this the kind of fasting or program I have chosen, to loose the chains of injustice, to untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke? If God is saying that this is the restoration program, to break free, set the oppressed free, pay attention. Where does your mind begin to go when God says, I'm going to restore all things, I'm going to set the oppressed free? Who's going to do the job? Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them and not to turn them away from your own flesh and blood, then your light will break forth like the dawn and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you will call and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help and he will say, here I am. If you do away with the yoke of oppression, with the pointing finger and malicious talk, and if you spend yourself in the behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness and your night will become like the noonday. The Lord will guide you always. He will satisfy your needs in the sun-scorched earth and will strengthen your frame, and you will be like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail. Your people will rebuild the ancient ruins and will raise up the age-old foundations. You will be called repairer of broken walls, restorer of streets with dwellings. It's an interesting picture to see this partner in the restoration, what is happening. Because you are the restorer. You are the repairer. Now, he will guide you always. He will sustain your frame or nourish your body. He will strengthen you. But you're going to become a well-watered garden and a spring whose waters never fail. Now the question is, how can God take somebody from a Genesis chapter 2, chapter 3 exile failure and turn them into an Isaiah chapter 58 partner of God? It's an interesting paradigm, an interesting problem, because there has to be something significant that happens. Those of us that live in America understand how hard it is to live out a life like Isaiah is writing about. So this question shows up in series chapter 1 of this restoration project. Maybe you can call it series 2 now, in Exodus. Because God has a problem. His partner is in slavery. This human entity that he's working with is now in bondage, in slavery for decades after decades. And slavery, I can't even comprehend it. It's impossible for me to comprehend what it would be like to live in slavery and just the after effects of what happens to generations, the mindset, just the whole framework is going. You don't make a decision for yourself, what you wear, what you eat, where you live, nothing. If you have children, if you don't, all of it is off your plate. You have no ability to make any decisions. And that gets passed on to generations. And we have this problem. God's partner now is in slavery. So God does something here, and we see the process out of Egypt. And Exodus chapter 6 says, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of Egypt. I will bring you from being slaves to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. Step 1 of restoration is right there. God will redeem you with an outstretched arm. You will no longer be slaves to the Egyptians. Not only that, you'll be free from slavery. That's different. It's one thing to be a slave, and it's another thing to be free from slavery. It's one thing to be an alcoholic. It's another thing to be free from alcohol. And he's saying, you're not even going to be a slave anymore. So in this, he says, I'm going to buy you back. He has to. I'm going to bring you back into fellowship. I'm bringing back you into family. I'm restoring, like laser pointer, I'm restoring back into this family that is here. And the word is lakach. It's intimately embrace. It's the same word as marry. God says, I'm going to restore you out of Egypt. I'm redeeming you back in here, and I'm going to marry you. You are going to be my intimate partner. So now, after this, Exodus 25 says, then I'm going to have you build me a sanctuary that I may live with you. I will redeem you. I will set you free from slavery. And then I'm going to move in. I'm living with you here in the desert. Now, we see this path that they're taking is a very interesting direction when you study the geography of Egypt, Sinai, and Israel. Because in Exodus 13 it says, when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. For God says if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the desert road toward the Red Sea. Now, this Philistine road is a well-traveled international trade route. Still today. You can still find it today. If they would have taken that route at the speed of Bedouins travel, it would have taken them 3 weeks to get to the Promised Land. 3 weeks. But God says, I can't take them that way because if they have war, they're not ready for it. So he said, I'm going to take you the desert route. Minimum 1 year. Put that in the back of your head. We're thinking about how does God restore somebody that was living in slavery and turn them into an Isaiah chapter 58 partner of God. And he says, I've got to take you this desert route. I've got to take you the hard way, the hard route. Now, it says, because if they face the Philistines, they're not ready for it. They had just left Egypt. Egypt was the United States of America in their day. God snaps his finger and the army is washed off the map. And for 100 years, Egypt is no longer a world power. I mean, Philistine is the Puerto Rico of their day. Great place, good people, small country. They're not ready to face Puerto Rico? Well, but God, you did this already. You set us free. You destroyed the armies behind us, and now... I think God's saying, yeah, see, I did everything in Egypt. I need a partner. This isn't just where God steps in and does everything. He's like, no, we have to work together here in bringing this order to this world. And he's saying, I need to put you in this desert. I need you to put you in this route because I have to train you. You don't know how to do it yet. Yes, I've redeemed you. Yes, you're no longer slaves, but we got to train. So at the end of this year, turns out to be 40, you'll be ready to bring order to the world. Now, those of you that are athletes and musicians get it right away. These are the hours of practice long before recital. These are the laps around the soccer field, the wind sprints, the dribbling technique, all that has to go into it. Why? Because you're not ready for the game. You have to put in this effort before you get in this. And before you're ready to face the Philistines, you have to learn how to live by every word that comes out of the mouth of God. You can't just jump into this. So the desert is God's way of training his partner. right after this, when God leads them the desert way, it says Moses told this to the Israelites. Oh, by the way, we're not going the shortest route. And he tells them that God will be with them. And it says that the children of Israel did not listen because of their broken spirit and hard labor. The Hebrew word literally means crushed spirits. They are so broken that God speaks to them and they're unable to listen. Those of you that have faced severe depression or lived with a debilitating pain or life-threatening illness understand this, where it's so dark, it's so just unable to comprehend what's going on. Somebody could walk on your front door and says, I would give you $1 million if you could make it to the front street, and you wouldn't be able to do it. These people are so in bondage to being a slave, have never been able to comprehend what is happening here, that God specifically talks to them, and they're just completely unable to hear. We are in the restoration business. I'll jump out of topic here a little bit. We are in the restoration business. We can't forget that. People are so bound into slavery that they can't even hear the words of God. Getting a louder megaphone and standing on the street corner and yelling at people will not do this. What did Isaiah chapter 58 say? If you want to restore, if you want to rebuild, share your food. Bring tomatoes. I love this. She doesn't know how close she is to the kingdom. So God takes these Hebrews, these slaves, these people with crushed spirits, and says, I need you in the desert. Now, that's backwards, right? If you set the slaves free, wouldn't you send them on a vacation? Give them a spa day? Have August off? Right? Isn't that how we Americans think? We'll build a better house for them and put them in there and make sure they have all the needs met and provide everything for them so they can recover? Or those of us that are just worn out, burnt out, living the American dream, right? If I can just have that newer thing or that better thing, it'll provide something for me and I'll have more energy and be able to do more. And God's saying, wait a minute, I need you over here in the desert. Because in the desert is where I can heal crushed spirits. Because that's where I can take you unto myself. The desert to the Hebrew becomes a picture of life's tough times. Those things that you go through, those lost jobs, those broken relationships, those illnesses, all of that becomes a picture of the desert. Now, in this Exodus story, there's an 80-year-old man that's leading the charge, Moses. He's 80. He's 80. Remember that. Who here's, I should do this. Who here is over 80? 80, roughly around 80. A lot. I saw one hand. Remember that. Brief side story on Moses. You see, when we read the Bible, we separate these characters because we only can see it from the ending. Like, I look at Moses, I see this whole body of work, right? We look at it. But he's born at a time that the government has outlawed birth of baby boys to slaves. I mean, I want you to put yourself there. What would a people be doing, a slave nation be doing when the government, Supreme Court, just says, boom, all baby boys, the slaves, killed? He's born at that time. He's born in the home of slaves. His family smuggles you out and places you into the reeds. There is a big, long discussion on that. Look it up sometime on why they would do that. If you ever have a chance in Egypt and Cairo, go to the Egyptian Archaeology Museum. There is a basket with a baby skeleton in it. There's a whole bunch of narratives that you can go down that path. It's safety, Nala's refuge. But your family places you there in a river that is very fast-moving, constantly changing. The sister stands back and watches. And now you are being rescued by the people who made the law that you should be killed. Now, you're growing up, think about this. If you were that child growing up in a home that outlawed your birth and was trying to kill you, being raised outside of a home that is a slave, just think of the trauma of a little boy being raised in this. We don't see that. Different language, different culture, different setting. So now he is growing up, and this trauma explodes into a fit of rage. And he sees an Egyptian beating his fellow people. And he kills him, buries him in the sand. What happens immediately after? He sees two Hebrews, his fellow people, arguing and fighting. And he tries to stop them, and they say, "Who are you, ruler? Are you Egyptian?" Realize what just happened. Kills an Egyptian. Pharaoh's now after him. The Egyptians, his home is now trying to get him. He sees his people fighting. He tries to stop it, and now his people are saying, "You don't belong here. You're Egyptian." Now Moses runs away without people or country. Broken. Ends up in the desert. I can't go into that whole thing. Why is he in the desert? But now he is 80 years old. He spent 40 there. He's already learning this process of God looking for a partner. He's led them across the Red Sea or the Reed Sea. Gets to Mount Sinai. And as soon as he gets there, God says, "All right, Moses, take the day off. Sit under a tree, grab some lemonade. Great job." No. Moses, come up here. Now, Mount Sinai is between 8,000 and 9,000 feet. I had the privilege of climbing with my oldest son, Zach. And pretty rough climb. Hot desert, just switchbacks. It's one of those mountains that's not really interesting to climb as much as it is just steps. Man, just pound it out. About a 6-hour climb. So it's a pretty decent climb. I want you to listen to what God tells Moses when he's up there, right? You just climbed 6 hours. You're 80 years old. Okay, just some of you that are there, hear me out. He's climbed about 6 hours. Gets to the top of the mountain. This is what God says. "This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob, and what are you to tell the people of Israel? You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites." Powerful words. I've talked on some of that before. I just want you to get, how long did that take? 30 seconds? And God tells Moses, "Go down and tell them." 80-year-old man picks up his bag. All right, down he goes. Now he gets back down to the mountain. He tells the people everything. He adds one thing in there. No intimate relations. God didn't tell him that. I just find that very interesting that Moses added something to God's words. I think he knew the people better than God did. I don't know. He gets down there. He tells the people everything. Now, I'm sure Moses now is off duty, right? He can go into his tent and have Zipporah create a nice bowl of soup, massage his shoulders. It just says, next line, so Moses brought the answer back to God. 80-year-old, up the mountain he goes again. The second time, the same day. Now, he gets up there and tells a little bit of a list of things for him to go do to consecrate the people, wash their clothes. So day 2, at the end of day 1, Moses goes back down and tells the people, we've got to consecrate ourselves, we've got to wash everything, purify ourselves, because God's going to descend the mountain on the 3rd day. So day 2's laundry day. You know, that's a day off, right, ladies? So day 2, they're cleaning everything up. On the morning of the 3rd day, there's this loud trumpet blast, lightning and thunder, and God says, Moses, come up here. And up he goes again. Now, I love what God tells him this time. I mean, sometimes God has such profound words that they just change your world. He looks at him and says, go down and get Aaron. I think Moses is like, call him like you do me every time. Moses, 80 years old, back down the mountain, gets Aaron, turns around, climbs back up the mountain. It's so easy for us to see the end of the story. Moses didn't know how many times he had to climb the mountain. Did. He didn't know after number 3 that it was going to be another time that day. I mean, I think he gets to the top of 3 and is like, made it. Go down and get Aaron. See, we miss this idea of why you're in the desert. We don't understand what is actually happening in here. But Moses becomes this model for the Hebrews because he's willing to give it everything, not just with his righteous living, but giving it absolutely everything he has for it. Vince Lombardi, the head coach of the New York Giants during their Super Bowl years, during halftime they were down, and Frank Gifford, their all-star running back and halfback, made this statement in retelling the story. It said, Vince Lombardi looked at them and says, guys, if you give me 110%, that's 10% too little. And I think Moses got that, saying, I want to do this in such a way that I have nothing left. Now, I can't do anything more than share what God talks to me about. But I hope when I'm able to look God in the eye, that I'm able to say, God, I've got nothing left. I gave it everything I had. When I first got to Israel and was living there, one of those stories that I always wanted to do was to react and re-hike the David story from the fields of Bethlehem to the valley of Elah. And I wanted to do it in the same setting that he did. Rise up early, have with me a pack that weighed roughly the same. He has, 8 cheese or 10 wedges of cheeses, 10 loaves of bread, and 3/5 ephod of grain. So it's about 50 to 55 pounds. So I throw this on my pack. Now, every time I heard these sermons as a boy, all of you heard them, he gets up early, rushes out to the valley of Elah, gets there before 11 o'clock tea, runs out in the field and slays Goliath and has the afternoon off. That's just how I heard these sermons growing up. So I'm like, it's about 17 miles by straight line road. I can average 3 miles an hour. Yeah. So I'm climbing out of this Judah desert into the Judah mountains. It's getting fairly warm. It was daybreak. It started off probably around 85, 90 degrees. And I began to question my sanity. That's rule number 1 in the desert, by the way. You can't lie to yourself. You can't. You're going to die or you're not. You know it. You can't lie to yourself and say, oh, I got this. You know, this is nothing. This is a walk in the park. No. Lies disappear immediately when you hit the desert. But I'm about 6 hours into this hike when I'm supposed to be almost there. And I'm just trudging through the Judah Mountains. Rough terrain, just back up and back down the whole time. And I'm beginning to grasp something that I did not like. And I'm beginning to realize, one, that I'm not going to make it out there when I thought I was going to make it out there. And those of you that are driven or 7 personalities or whatever, let's go do this. I realize I'm not going to be able to do it. To get there to the time that I wanted, I'm getting tired, and I'm just wearing out. So I found myself about 11 o'clock in the morning sitting under just a scrubby oak tree and just contemplating this story so much, and I'm beginning to cry because it fully impacted me that if God had asked me to slay Goliath, I couldn't do it. Not only would I barely be able to get there, there's no way in the world I'm going to run out in that field. I'm just going to, I'm done. You go. I'll never forget what happened. God spoke, not audibly, but deeply, profoundly. He said, David, I didn't ask you to slay Goliath. All I'm asking is you to take the next step. So I stood up, shouldered my backpack, and took the next step. Painful. 26 miles. 2 days later, I made it. See, these times of desert experiences where the Spirit begins to grow, and I had an amazing walk with Christ that day because I realized that it's not the destination. Moses didn't know what was at the top of the mountain. David didn't know he was going to fight Goliath. All he said, or all they knew to do, was, I just have to take the next step. That's all we can do. Doesn't matter what's going on, doesn't matter what's around us. God says, I'm going to strengthen your frame. I'm going to carry you on eagle's wings. I'm going to be there for you, but I have to partner with you, and you have to take the next step. I love I'm not going to remember what book of the Bible. It might be, I'm not going to remember. He's looking back on his time with the children of Israel in the desert. He says, oh, how I led you like a bride through the desert. In my head, what was important on that hike was the destination. If I can go there, then I. And God's saying, no. I don't put you in the desert to get to the end. I got to have you here so you'll learn just to take the next step, to walk with God in this, to see how he's laying out each aspect of our life. Martin Luther King said, you take the first step in faith, you don't have to see the whole staircase. Take the first step. So Moses at 80 climbs the mountain again. Now, if that was the case for the children of Israel, you have to ask, how does God still restore broken spirits today? I love this. This is the beginning of John the Baptist on the scenes. And it says that the child grew and became strong in spirit. So immediately you should go, okay, if this is how he's done it in the past, how is he going to create? Now you got to realize John the Baptist is an important person. He is preparing the way for the Messiah to come. He is trying to preach his gospel message and says, the kingdom of heaven is coming near. By the way, it's the same message that Christ said. It's here. By the way, it's the same message we have today. The kingdom of heaven is here. The kingdom of heaven is here. How do you prepare somebody to say that the kingdom of heaven is here? It says that he became strong in spirit. How? What's the method? I had always been taught that tough times are the enemies fighting against us, and some are. But we always say, God, please remove me from the desert. Please take this from me. This is the evil one. This is not of you. Remove this from me. Remove this problem from me. Remove this desert. I can't handle it. And God's saying, but I need you here. I need you in this desert, because deserts are a place for God to know who we are and for us to know who we are. They're a place where God is able to carry us on eagle's wings. They're a place where he nourishes us and shows us how much he loves us. He's a place where all of God's missions begin, in the desert. Every single one of these stories in the Bible begin with the desert. And God says, I need you there. I need you there. Yes, ask for shade. Beg for mercy. Ask for living water. But then trust God. Get up, like Moses, shoulder your pack, climb the mountain. Because on the top of the mountain, I love how Elijah puts it in talking about this. God says, I'm not in the fire. I'm not in the wind. I'm not in the earthquake. I'm in the still small voice. That still small voice is as the whispers of a lover in the ear, saying, okay, we got this. We turn and go back down the mountain, not knowing if we get back down there, and God says, Moses, come up here. Our job is to take the next step. In doing so, he creates strong spirits. And if you create strong spirits, out of you will be like a well-watered garden. You're going to be restorer of broken walls, repairer of those things. Because now God says, I can use this. And we can bring restoration to the earth. Let's stand.